Great. Kia ora, good morning, and thank you for joining us. My name's Todd, and I'm meeting you and joining you from sunny Auckland, Aotearoa, New Zealand. Despite the backdrop, I'm in a little bunker, our version of the bunker, but I'm welcome to introduce Chris Miller, who has a vast experience in both emergency management and business continuity, and is going to talk to us on enterprise risk management today. Thank you for joining us, Chris, and over to you.
Thank you, Todd, and welcome to those able to join us in person or listening later. This is part of a series of webinars that the Continuity and Resiliency team based in the UAE and India have been presenting to their clients, and I'm one of their facilitators on enterprise risk management. This is a sort of taster session before the 4-hour online self-learning program that gets underway. So it was interesting for those of you who listened to the recording of 28 and 29 September to take 4 hours and compress it into less than 40 minutes. That was a challenge. But for those of us who've been involved in emergency and risk management and business continuity management for a very long time, risk management is the umbrella that overarches all of that. We have to understand what the risks might be before we can prepare adequately for them. There's lots of talk about black swans, but I'm more a grey rhino girl myself. I'm more into let's look for those weak signals, sometimes not so weak signals, that Michelle Walker writes about in her book about grey rhinos. At the same time, looking at Nazim Nicholas Taleb's work on black swans also helps alert us to get that foresight that we need, which is a platform for enterprise risk management that leads us into enhanced resiliency. So thanks for joining us. Now, Todd and I have had a bit of a chat about a few questions that might be of interest, but we happily wait upon any questions you might have, and you can always follow up with me. I'm readily found on LinkedIn. So over to Todd.
Right, so I have a great question based on one of your initial slides that provides a definition of resilience. I challenge you, what are the other definitions of resilience, and what does that mean to us working within this space?
Well, there may be an international standard, Todd. 22316 is a relevant international standard, and that definition is widely known. But there are also other definitions that we might consider. So when I was a police officer, if we didn't have a definition in the Act, we used to rely very much, or in case law, we would rely on the Oxford Dictionary. So I decided to have a look at what the Oxford Dictionary had to say. And their definition is the capacity to withstand or recover quickly from difficulties. It also talks about toughness and the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape, elasticity. So toughness and elasticity are very important concepts in this space. But springing back, I'm not so sure I'm an entire supporter of that view. I'm a bit of a bounce forward person. A lot of my clients, particularly in the business continuity space, I remember one CIO rather uncharitably saying something along the lines of, no lunatic would set up their IT like this. Now his problem was they had a lot of legacy systems. So when they had a challenge, he was hoping that some of those legacy systems will be rewritten into more modern platform arrangements, so that they would actually be easier to manage and perhaps less vulnerable to cyber attacks. Although some places I've worked, there's been a joke that the legacy systems are so old that the cyber attackers probably wouldn't know what to do with them anyway. So, bit of black humour there. So whether you want to bounce back or whether you want to bounce forward is actually part of the discussion about enterprise risk management, as well as resiliency. Resiliency, I see it as a kind of strengthening, so that toughness and elasticity. But it's also about agility. It's also about elasticity and preparedness. So moving on to another definition of resiliency, this one is from the Cambridge Dictionary. The ability to be happy. Okay, I don't think too many people I meet are happy because we're usually talking about gloomy possibilities. Todd and I are both associated to the Australasian Institute of Emergency Services, so we can't help ourselves but talk about bad news stories. So happy, all right, that's a thought. Successful. Now, every business wants to be successful. So I have a business. You are all involved in some sort of businesses. Todd's involved with the university. Our friend Astrid here has a yoga practice. Whatever your business is, you want it to be successful. And enterprise risk management maybe helps you get ahead with foresight for the possible pitfalls that you might be able to avoid. One of my very big bosses, secretary of a large Australian government department, used to say, if you don't have a business continuity plan, you'll fall into a crevasse. If you do have a business continuity plan, the crevasses will come closer together and you might be able to leap across. There'll always be things you haven't anticipated. And no matter how good your enterprise risk management is, there will be things you can't anticipate. But you want a resilient organisation in place so that you've got that agility to jump across the crevasse if need be. So continuing with the Cambridge Dictionary, so successful, after something difficult or bad has happened. Trauma researchers emphasise the resiliency of the human psyche, and that's an important point in the resiliency space. It isn't only about your business or your country, which is often the unit of analysis for me. It is also about your people, your community. We know that in many disasters, it isn't the lights and siren people that arrive, as much as my colleagues would like to be there and to help you. Often it's your neighbours that have to come forward and help you. So, for instance, in heat waves, people say in Australia, check on your neighbours. I remember working in a business continuity team where the chief financial officer had two small children. Now, what was going to happen if there was a community disaster? She was a single mother. Who was going to step forward and help her? So we actually put in place childcare arrangements because she was such a critical staff member. We needed to bring her forward. And there have been many examples of wise practice in anticipating and preparing for challenges and making sure that it's not just the business, it's the people that make the business. Because even with AI, robots, 3D, micro factories, all these clever things that we're developing in the technology space, doesn't really matter what the business is. What's been clear to me over and over again is it's your people. If you don't get the people straight, if you don't have people with good morale, if you don't have people with capacity for elasticity, then you're really whistling Dixie for a resilient organisation. And lastly, once upon a time, I invested in a very expensive double major in psychology. So I thought, let's look at what the psychologists have to say about resiliency. And they talk about the process and outcome of successfully adapting to difficult and challenging life experiences, especially through mental, emotional, and behavioural flexibility and adjustment to external and internal demands. That raises a very important point about your dependencies. Your organisation may be in good shape, but what about the dependencies? What about the organisations, your supply chain, the people on whom you rely? I remember many years ago a business continuity manager from an airline talking about identifying more than 40,000 dependencies for just their domestic operations, not their international, just domestic. 120 of which could stop the airline flying. You really think hard about your dependencies when you've got 120 very critical dependencies in your system. And their senior team, their board said, well, you get out there and start working with those 120 other businesses to bring their resiliency, to bring their business continuity up to the standard of our business, our airline, because we've invested a lot of money in business continuity, in enterprise risk management, trying to get ahead of the curve and trying to build a resilient business. Hope that covers what you had in mind, Todd.
Yeah, a couple of great points you made there around elasticity and agility there. Another term that I've seen used is adaptation. Resilience. You make the great point around is it bouncing back or is it bouncing forward? If you bounce back to previous, are you really being more resilient, building an additional resilience to the next disruption, or do you in fact need to adapt so that you are more resilient the next time? So how does that term adaptation fit into resilience from your perspective?
Well, it's certainly in that international standard I mentioned to you, 22316, 2017, Security and Resiliency, Organisational Resilience, Principles and Attributes. That definition actually does include resiliency as the ability of an organisation to absorb and adapt in changing environment. And I'll come back to that in a moment because there's a lot of that going on. To enable it to deliver its objectives and survive and prosper. Another important point. This concept, detailed in this standard, emphasises both strategic planning, which is the enterprise risk management space, and operational preparedness, which is so vital in the emergency management space, but also in the business continuity space, to anticipate and respond to disruptions. We're coming back full cycle to enterprise risk management in that definition, because enterprise risk management gives you a platform for anticipating and responding to whatever it is that might come your way. I mean, you're in New Zealand, Todd, and we make these jokes, and even you do. I used to spend a month in New Zealand when I was president of the AIES, attending the Massey short course and so on. Even you guys joke about the shaky isles, or another colleague, I think, said, we're awaiting our 38th volcano. So you know that you live in a very disaster-prone part of the world, and so do we in Australia. So we must be anticipating and responding to disruptions. But coming back to that point about adaptation, yes. One of the things I often do in my business continuity practice, as we were talking about yesterday, is to work in two parts. One is to look at the business as usual of the business. And are there sort of little clunky bits there that could be smoothed to make it less likely to fail, as well as what are we going to do if there's some sort of major disruption? So that's sort of in the adaptation part. Can we adapt our businesses, our organisations, our enterprises in a way that they're more resilient, less likely to fail? A good idea. Changing environment, well, that of course takes us immediately into VUCAD. Notions of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. And D is interesting. There's a lot of debate about that. Is it disruptive, disrupted, digital, diverse? And there's even a bit of chatting about, could there be another C for chaos, because we're certainly having a lot of that. So if you're interested in all that VUCAD discussion, that really helps you focus your mind on the changing environment and structure some of that thinking. And survive and prosper. A lot of the risk management in the past has been sort of negative, but you want to pursue opportunities for your business. You want to be future focused, and enterprise risk management might help you pick up things. Take, for instance, Kodak. Kodak actually invested in developing a compact digital camera in the 1970s. They went as far as patenting it, but they didn't promote it. And sometimes, turning to a more positive story, think about 3M and Post-it notes. Yeah, I've got a couple here. Post-it notes. You've probably seen them all over the place, used them in many workshops, seen them on many walls, stuck all over the place. Goodness, I would have liked like a piece of that action. Now, that was actually a failed glue. 3M um, had their laboratory people working on a glue, and it failed. It didn't stick permanently, which is what they wanted. And then one of the marketing team apparently went down to the laboratory for some reason and went, "Oh, this stuff's stuck everywhere. Oh, what's this stuff? Oh, that's the failed glue." But the marketing person went, "Forget failed glue. That's a real opportunity. That's something we're going to pursue." And fortunately, their senior leaders did see it as something they could pursue. And of course, the rest is, boy, how much money have they made out of that invention, a failed glue that's been a wildly successful story. And this raises the important point of bringing more of the team in. The laboratory people and the tasking manager saw that 3M glue thing as a disastrous failure. Spent all that money, and what do we get? Something that's not a permanent glue, which is what we were hoping for. But the marketing person saw it in a different way. And obviously, people other than Kodak who were so wedded to the old way of developing film, both for cinema as well as, box cameras, couldn't see that analog was moving to digital, and they wanted to stick to their old model. So their risk appetite was very low risk. Unfortunately for them, some other competitors were not so hesitant about jumping on the digital camera bandwagon. And of course, now you need a digital camera, try your phone. So there's a great example of an opportunity that could have been pursued by Kodak, but wasn't. An opportunity from 3M that looked like a failure, but was pursued as an opportunity and turned into a vast success.
So, Chris, I've got a question slightly off track here, but very much aligns to the topic. We sometimes see, and I see this myself where I am, trying to bring together these disparate silos of business continuity, emergency management, and strategic risk or enterprise risk management. The three things to me appear to have some really collaborative crossovers, but often we see them as separate, distinct silos at different phases or at different levels. What are your suggestions around, first of all, why, and then how do we bring them together to be more collaborative and interlinked?
Yes, I've had this problem many times, Todd. Surprise, surprise. Particularly when I worked for ACT Health. They had a very strong emergency management culture. They had an excellent doctor in charge of emergency management, both the sort of ward that we might call emergency management, where people turn up in the ambulance and so on. And you used to be followed in by people like me when I was in police. Often, I seem to spend almost as much time at hospitals as I did at the police station. That's the way it is in that kind of business. But uh, they had a strong emergency management plan that was well exercised and well understood. They had an excellent IT DRP that was unfortunately not connected in any way to a BCP, so they didn't actually know what they were trying to save. And when I came on board, the fellow in charge thought, "Thank God, now I can actually have someone help us with a business impact analysis and a risk assessment so we can actually understand what the business priorities are rather than making some heroic guesses." So they kind of had two bits of the story, but not the middle bit. So I drew them a little simple diagram, which was a bit nonsensical for a hospital, but it made the point. Emergency management's about saving the people. Business continuity is about saving the business. And that sort of helped them understand how the two would slide over. Now, quite often, you're still saving the people when you're switching on the business continuity part of your business. And yes, silos, and then over the top of that, you've got the whole risk assessment. What is the risk? for instance, after Hurricane Katrina, we looked at the terrible thing that happened to one of the hospitals there, where they couldn't evacuate some of their most impacted patients, and sadly, some of them died. And even more sadly, some of the staff were held to account in criminal matters, which eventually were withdrawn. Because what you would normally do is you get everyone out of the hospital that you can possibly remove. So you stop elective surgery and send the walking wounded home and so on, so that you're only left with the most critical patients. We actually looked at how long it would take us to evacuate even those critical patients. And the answer was 3 days, using our own resources, our own helicopter and so on and so on. So it is a real problem bringing those disciplines together, particularly in a large enterprise like a health service and a huge referral hospital. But you have to try and help them join the dots so that they can have a clean handover. I often work with chief fire officers, chief fire wardens, so that we can get that handover as neat as possible for business continuity. And I have been a devil a few times. I've actually run exercises where they're doing their annual fire evacuation, which is required in Australia for many buildings, particularly multi-storey ones, and started the business continuity exercise while they were in the fire escape, just to make the point about the overlap between emergency management and business continuity. I mean, optimally in a large business, you'd want it in the governance and compliance space, where you would bring in risk, business continuity, emergency management. They'd all work happily together and work in the organisation to bring down those silos and see how the interconnection can work to best effect.
Great, thank you for that. So going back to VUCAD, can you explain a bit more around how VUCAD can be applied and the benefits of it for a practitioner?
I think it gives you some structure, and it's sort of it's easy to explain to the clients, because often people like ourselves kind of feel a bit like John the Baptist. We're out there yelling about in the desert, and people aren't always getting what we're on about. So a simple model like VUCAD, volatility being things like nature and dynamics of change. Well, we've certainly had a lot of that, particularly during COVID. I don't know if you've noticed in New Zealand, but certainly in Australia, a lot of things have moved forward. I remember clients that told me, "Oh no, it's impossible to work remotely." Oh, really? And then along came COVID, and all of a sudden it became possible. Oh dear. But of course, counter to that, my immediate thought was, well, okay, one of the reasons why you told me it wasn't possible was IT security. What the hell security controls have you pulled out of the system to make that possible? So you need to retrofit and have a look at them. So volatility in this changing environment. Even before COVID, we're in a changing environment, but I think COVID's really accelerated it. And especially things like AI. I mean, for instance, we wouldn't have had the COVID vaccines without AI, because AI ran a lot of the tests. I was involved in the vaccine development for the first SARS pandemic, SARS-CoV-1 as it was called. And even though that had thankfully a much less significant footprint, it was still quite significant in Canada, China, and some other Asian countries where there are a significant number of cases. Now, that vaccine failed at the animal testing phase. So when people were saying to me, "Oh, yes, we'll have a vaccine for SARS-CoV-2," I went, "Oh, yeah, you think?" But because the data could be ran through much faster with supercomputers and AI and a whole lot of very good basic science, because a lot of people say, "Oh, no, the COVID vaccines came out of nowhere." Actually, no. It came from Nobel Prize people who'd spent more than 20 years and struggled to get a grant for anything to develop the mRNA platforms that we relied on. So We're in this volatile and very changing world. It's pushing forward with a lot of technology, but sadly at the same time, a lot of mis and disinformation, which is also not helpful. We're in a world of uncertainty, and that sort of leads into this whole mis and disinformation. You don't know who to believe or what to believe. We're sort of wandering around hoping that we're on the right track. But are we? And trying to get back to the original sources to look at the basic science, the evidence, to make sure that we're on a strong position. Because if you look at social media, it would be very easy to be misled. You just don't know where some of that information's coming from and how solid it is. Complexity. Oh dear. This is another issue in the in the emergency management business continuity space. We're in a state of polycrisis or permacrisis. In the good old days, dare I say, good old days, when I first started in emergency management, it was very clear that we had a so-called disaster season. It would begin in October and it would end March, April. And the rest of the year you'd train, exercise, get ready for that disaster season, because that's when we had the most likelihood of fires, floods, cyclones, all those kind of things. I suppose in New Zealand, with your geophysical challenges, there was never a disaster season for you. It's continued. But in other places, we had the happy situation of some sort of break. And then you get things like the LA fire in January. That's winter. Or we've had nasty fires in August in the Blue Mountains, our beautiful World Heritage area, the Blue Mountains. So disaster season, that's gone. And therefore you're in a state of continuous preparedness, which makes it very hard for training and exercising, fire preparations, all sorts of things are very hard to do when you're in a continuous state of response. So we're finding ourselves with all these multitude of events sort of piling on top of each other. When do you ever have a chance to breathe? Ambiguity. Back to the misinformation, disinformation. Who and what do you believe? There's so many sources of information all coming at you, but which of them is the right one? And disruption, disruptive, disrupted, digital, diverse. Where do we start in that space? We're in a very disrupted world. And some people have said to me, well, we've had the COVID pandemic, we're fine. Well, actually, we're not. With anyone with a sense of history and health emergencies, you would know that we're overdue for an influenza pandemic. And the last one was, they come in a cycle since Roman times, about every 100 years, where we get a novel virus that we have no immunity to. And the last one was 1819, the so-called Spanish flu. And if you look at the 100-year cycle, you're overdue. The COVID is an entirely different virus, so therefore it in no way helps us, other than perhaps writing new plans to prepare for what comes next. And if you think COVID was disruptive, just wait until we get hit by that influenza virus. The estimate for the Spanish flu is 50 million people. I've run some numbers on what would be the equivalent case fatality death rate now on the current population, estimated global population. It's somewhere between 250 and 300 million people. And that would be working age people. It's another thing people don't understand. Pandemic influenza doesn't attack the traditional people. So seasonal influenza that we have every year tends to be a problem for younger people, older people, and people with an otherwise compromised immune system. Pandemic influenza attacks working age people because your immune system actually reacts against you. So we could find ourselves in another state of disruption very quickly. That's not good news. But there's
No,
all sorts of other things. I mean, you guys could have your
mm,
38th volcano, you could have the Transalpine Fault give way. I've been doing work in Manila. They've got an earthquake anticipated in the next 50 to 100 years with Manila, which is a mega city. Oh, that'd be wonderful. And the one of 1645 that they think will be repeated was a shallow earthquake at 7.2. Imagine what that would do to a city of 15 million people.
yeah, it goes beyond comprehension, really, doesn't it? When we look at the uncertainty and ambiguity of VUCAD and the emergence of AI, one of the things we're seeing more prevalent now is these almost realistic videos of that are coming out during the onset of a disruption or a disaster that it's very hard for responders, for emergency managers to look at that and verify it with any certainty around is this fact or is this fiction. So it's providing a whole nother level of complexity around what information is converted into verifiable intelligence. Going back to the options for enterprise risk treatment, you've offered 5 options there. There's one there I'd love to talk about, which is transference. What does that mean to an organization, and where are their responsibilities delineated if they are looking at outsourcing or insurance?
Indeed, and many people think that insurance and the like will get them out of the hole, so to speak, or outsourcing. We were talking yesterday about that experience I had with Virgin Australia, where I rocked up to check in and they said, "Oh, we're having trouble with our online system. It's been outsourced to Indian providers." And I went, "Yeah, that's great, except it's your name on the ticket." And this is a problem in the transference space. Yes, risk acceptance, take no action. We've recognised it. You know, that might be fine for the asteroids, except if you work for NASA or the European Space Agency or Indian or Chinese Space Agency. It's high on your list of something you want to do. But transference, you know, are you going to insure against whatever it is? Now, some of my clients have discovered to their great distress, for want of a better term, that their cyber insurance didn't quite cover what they thought it was going to cover. Check the fine print. Business interruption insurance. I've had colleagues say to me, "Oh, don't need business continuity because we have business interruption insurance." I used to work for an insurance company, Aon. I said to them, "Check the fine print." I actually work with some of the insurance agents. They said, "Yeah, check the fine print. Most of your business interruption insurance won't start paying until 6 weeks after the incident." Well, that's great. So you've got 6 weeks of negative cash flow. What are you going to do about that? And I often say, that's where business continuity fits. What are you going to do about the 6 weeks of no cash flow? So, and if it's a fire, you're very unlikely to get paid out promptly until the investigation concludes that it wasn't an arson. So transference has its problem. It is part of a solution, and I'm not suggesting for a moment that you don't consider business interruption insurance and other insurances, cyber attack insurance, all sorts of things that might protect your business. Oh no, I'm not suggesting that for a moment. But it's more of a partial solution. And the problem is your business, your enterprise still owns the risk. You can't outsource risk. It's got your name on it, like the Virgin ticket. It's still got your name on it. Outsourcing has its challenges too. You might say, "Oh well, this is a critical part of our business, and it's vulnerable, so I'll outsource it." Okay, righto, that's good. Make sure you write a very good contract. I had another client who was making fire suppression things, you know, would go on the ceiling and so. And excuse me, they were manufacturing most of the components. Then they decided it was a good idea to outsource that one of the critical components. to a group in Bella Vista, which is an industrial park in the west of Sydney. Except, and everything was going smoothly for a while. They were getting their widgets, they were assembling them in Canberra, it was all fine. And then all of a sudden, no more widgets, and they're running short of their supply. So they rang up their colleagues at Bella Vista and they said, where are our widgets? Oh, they said, no, there's floods in Thailand. And they went, huh? Well, what's that got to do with us? We've got a contract with you in Sydney. Oh, no. We outsource that contract. What? You didn't tell us. Well, we're not required to. Read your contract. Another client I came across, we discovered they had physical security 12 levels down from the contracted level. So watch out. If you outsource, may outsource from them unless you've got a really rock solid contract. They're not obliged to tell you. And the time to discover you've got a problem isn't when you've got a problem. You need to know about it before you've got the problem. So transference, sounds like a good plan and part of a solution, but not without risks within risks, dare I suggest.
So what about anti-fragility? Tell me about that.
Anti-fragility. Well, that's interesting. So for those of you who followed up with Taleb and his black swans, you know that he's gone beyond black swans to talk about anti-fragility. And it's interesting when you think about that whole question of anti-fragility. Is it, you've actually got to understand where your fragility is before you can be anti-fragile, if that makes sense. If you don't actually know where your vulnerabilities are, how can you prepare for them? And that's one of the points that keeps being made by other colleagues, where they're pulling apart that whole discussion of fragility. So Taleb, for those of you who've had the opportunity to meet him, met him in person, but on a few webinars, he's actually an economist. And his thesis is, in a volatile world, oh, surprise, surprise, he's in DeVucad too, it seems, with a lot of destructive uncertainty, the wise economic or business strategy is to be anti-fragile. But as our colleague Marco Felsberger rightly points out, fragility without resiliency is diagnosing a disease without a treatment plan. Fragility tells you where things might break. Remember my comment about how I help clients in the business continuity space. Understand whether we can smooth out some of their business processes so we make them less fragile, less likely to fail. Whereas resiliency is the system, how the system absorbs the stress and recovers or moves forward. Resiliency, therefore, is dynamic. And it's not a state, it's a continuous process. That's the point that Marco's making, and it's well made. So we need to be very clear when we're talking about anti-fragility. We actually have to understand fragility first before we can become anti-fragile and resilient. And enterprise risk management may be a platform for understanding what your fragility is, what the threats and hazards might be, but at the same time, what the opportunities you might like to pursue could be.
So is anti-fragility just another buzzword to be used in lieu of resilience?
No, I think that the two actually run well together because you have to understand your fragility first before you can become resilient. And that's why this whole risk management becomes an umbrella over all of this. If you don't understand your position, you can't prepare for it. You can't become anti-fragile unless you know what your fragility is in the first instance.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm just going to open up. Astrid, if you have any questions or comments on what we've discussed now or previously.
Thanks, Todd. I do agree with all the things that Chris said, especially I think resilience is not just needed by the management, but also in person by the workers, by the one or two or maybe the whole, because uh, it happened to me personally and the company where I work. Okay, in the past we need to meet face to face, right? But this time we can have Zoom here, like what we are doing now. And as Chris said, that in the past, working from home is impossible. Right now, that's what I'm doing. I work from home ever since I joined the company. And in the past, to do all things the job, the person needs to get the agreement from the management. Right now, sadly, uh, because of the approval by the management, by the company, uh, almost all, including me, can do it without discussing it with the management, as long as it follows the rules and the knowledge that we have. And that is sad because uh, then it now leads something to AI. Recently, I found something sad personally that uh, in the past I need friends to talk, and recently I don't need friends to talk because I'm sorry, uh, the AI, you can talk about it by ChatGPT or Copilot. They can be without physics to be a friend for me, and they even talk better than, I'm sorry, than human. They talk nicer. They know all. Of course, they know all because they use their system, the technology, to get the information. So they know all things. They know all things that I ask. So it's kind of sad. So that's why I do agree with this program that it's not just about resilience, but it's all about the preparation for us to accept the change and to change and to handle the change. If we don't have those things, I don't think we will follow the life. There are so many things change in life right now, and if we don't prepare for it, I don't think we can continue our life, our business, our work. So I agree with this program that at least there's a foundation of preparedness, the foundation of the willingness to accept and change. If not, uh, most people who are not following the trend, I don't think they can grow. So that's personal. Also, the management. If the management disagree with the change, how come their business will grow? And on the something special is that security. Right now, the crime is amazing. In the past, it is done physically, but right now the crime can happen in technology by AI, because recently I know that someone can make someone's video and act as that person, and in Indonesia they can steal some money, So there are many changes that I think we need to follow it, we need to accept, and we need to handle it
Thank
properly.
you, Astrid. Do you have a question for Chris?
Uh, right now I don't have a question. I just
No?
see
Great.
something positive about her program. So thank you, Chris. It's good. It's Your program is good to build the confidence for people and the management and the company to accept and to handle the change.
Thank you so
Oh,
much,
great,
Astrid.
Ashley. Thank you. You've actually raised several good points I mentioned earlier about can't do remote. But the worst of these, I used to be the business continuity manager at Parliament House. And I did suggest to them long before COVID about the possibility of working remotely. Oh, no, 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 that's not possible because of security and IT security and rah, rah, rah. And guess what? We had remote parliaments during COVID. It's remarkable. But one of the downsides, you were talking about sort of so many of you and your colleagues working remotely and the lack of connection. A lot of innovation is this talk about water cooler chats. A lot of innovation happens when you actually get together and you spend more time just, chewing the fat, as we would say, perhaps, having a little chat about this or that. And you never know what might come out of that. So some businesses are happily agreeing to remote work, but having quarterly get-togethers. Some of them have Friday drinks virtually. Some of them have planning meetings in the morning. There's all sorts of ways of actually trying to make those connections so you don't lose that window of opportunity to possibly pursue. And your point about AI too, one of the concerns about AI that's starting to come through is, are we reinforcing failure rather than learning new things and and moving into innovation? That's not to say for a moment I'm against AI. I use it a lot, particularly for long reports. Thank goodness for Adobe's AI summarizing feature. Why don't put that to good use? But are we reinforcing failure rather than encouraging innovation? So there's pluses and minuses. But your point about what we call risk appetite is innovation's only really possible when you've got a risk appetite statement, a risk appetite culture within the senior management that enables a pathway to innovation. And you saw in Kodak, for instance, they said, oh, no, people will only want printed photos, analog. No, they won't want that digital stuff. No. Really? So how is your senior team positioned to take opportunities, to pursue opportunities that might be identified? Back to those 5 things I mentioned in the risk space: risk acceptance, transference, reduction, pursue, and there's another one that'll spring to mind. So what is your positioning? You have to have a leadership that's in a headspace to be able to lead you through from analog to digital or whatever the next innovation might be. Back to you, Todd.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate you sharing your insights today and answering some of those really niggly questions that came out of, thought-provoking elements that came out of your earlier presentation. Again, I just want to thank you, and Astrid, thank you for joining us, and hopefully the listeners to the recording gain some value out of our line of questioning. What is the next step for people after listening to this? What is the progress from here, Chris?
Yes, the colleagues at CORE, that's Continuity and Resiliency, be only too happy to hear from more people who might be interested in undertaking the self-paced online learning program of 4 hours. We will focus really heavily in this whole enterprise risk management, taking you through from a risk identification, analysis, treatments, monitoring and evaluation, and doing that continuous cycle of plan, do, check, act. For those of you familiar with international standards, you'll know that that's the system that they support. How are you going to plan for it? What are you going to do in terms of preparation that might come from that planning activity? Check, act when something happens. Now, you go to New Zealand and very quickly you learn about what to do if there's an earthquake. Hop under the table and so on and so on. So what are you going to do to push forward these ideas? And as you saw with that 3M example I gave you, it's a team sport. The more colleagues you have in this space working on understanding what the risk profile is for your business, both the positive and the negative, the better result you'll get. The more resilient organisation you'll get. And going back to my HR and psychology background, people will feel included. They'll want to support the success and prosperity of your business.
Right, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much for your time, Chris.
Thank you, Todd.
I would like to say thank you also for Chris and Todd. Thank you for giving me the chance to listen and to learn more. It's not just about new knowledge, new skills, but also about the mentality, about accepting, about handling, the willingness. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Astrid, and thank you for those listening to this recording. I'll just stop it.